This time on Poll Hub, the January 6th hearings may be nearing an end, but what's been the impact? We're digging into the data from our brand new poll with our partners at NPR and the PBS NewsHour to find out. Then, inflation is easily the biggest concern for Americans this summer, but as gas prices start to fall, will the worry wither as well? Spoiler alert, unlikely. We'll discuss. Then, our fun fact this week is a replay of one from earlier this year. We liked it so much, we decided to ask a question again from the past on a new poll to see if things have changed. Spoiler alert! Oh, come on. You think we're going to give it away here? Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I am Lee Merengoff. And we are right now coming to what at least looks like of this phase, the final chapter of the investigation that's going on with these hearings, which I personally have found very riveting. However, when we look at our recent poll with the NPR PBS NewsHour, we find that the countries have really two minds, and Democrats are seeing one world and Republicans are seeing another world. And I don't think that's shocking, other than it is sort of a repeat of what people are seeing. So let me get to some of the poll numbers and then we can talk about what it all means. So we have seen now, the numbers are showing that former President Donald Trump is seen by a majority of Americans, 57%. Feel he is to blame for what occurred. Half the country thinks he should face criminal charges for his actions, but only 28% think he will. Half the country thinks this is really now qualifies as an insurrection. We'll see Democrats thinking that again, but when it comes to Republicans, they're more likely to think there was just a political protest protected under the First Amendment, or that it was an unfortunate past event, but not much cause for future worry. So the big question is, what does this all mean about where America is today, and where is this all going? We've got the midterm elections coming up right around the corner.
Well, I think your first point, Lee, this being seen from two different perspectives is really speaks to the heart of the matter. We asked another question, too, about whether people feel that the issues that divide us in this country are a threat to the democracy. And here we see a pretty significant consensus. 77% of Americans agree that the issues that divide us are a threat to our democracy. But if we drill down as to what we think those issues are, we see very, very different things depending upon whether you wear a D on your hat or whether you wear an R on your hat. And when it comes to independence, even independents lean one way or the other. There are very few Americans really describe themselves as completely independent and not leaning towards one party or the other. And so Republicans really see, a threat to the economy. They see a threat to a lot of the values that they hold dear. And they do not think that the current President Biden, is someone that is moving the country in the right direction. And Democrats really see the threat to democracy as a continuation of the Trump administration, as a move to the conservative right, and also that there was really a coup, as how that they describe it, that was in place to overturn an election that was not fraudulent, that was not rigged.
The threat to democracy is also seen by a lot of Republicans in that they think the election was rigged and that Joe Biden's not a legitimate president. So that's part of it. It's not just the issues, but also it has to do with, what they've perceived to be a threat to the democracy being very different than what Democrats do.
I think what's really significant here, too, is that what's really a threat to democracy, from my perspective, is that we can't agree on the facts.
Yeah, and I just want to hone in a little bit on one of the numbers that Lee mentioned in terms of the characterization of the events of January 6, 2021, that 19% say that it was a political protest protected under the First Amendment. Now, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but hey, why not? The First Amendment says that we as Americans have a right to peaceably assemble. If you look at the pictures, if you look at what unfolded on January 6th, there's nothing about what happened. Nothing there was peaceful in that assembly. Nothing there was calm or, dare I say, rational in terms of entering the U.S. Capitol. To some extent, it's shocking to some extent. It's jarring. And I think this really comes back. There's a little bit of a dichotomy, Barb, to what you were saying about 3/4 of Americans thinking that our democracy is under threat based on the issues that divide us.
One of the things that stands out to me is looking at the trend here, because we've talked a lot about these hearings and how much impact they've had. And I think one of the ways that we can really add to the conversation is we've asked the questions before, several of these questions, and so have other organizations. And I think there's been a lot of talk about these hearings having an impact, at least on the margins, Republicans being a little less in love with Donald Trump or a little less likely to hold him completely unresponsible for this. But they really are in the margins. If you take a look at the trend on a couple of these questions that we've asked, for instance, how much do you think Donald Trump is to blame for what happened at the Capitol? A great deal, good amount, not very much, not at all. A great deal and a good amount. On January 8th, 2021, we asked the question. I mean, it's 2 days after, and it was 64%. Right now, it's 57%. So it's actually come down from there. It went down a lot the following week. We asked on January 15th, 2021, and it came down to 58%. But we're really not in any different place than we were 1 week after the insurrection in terms of that question and a couple of others. So I question how much the hearings have had an impact on Americans' opinions, especially in light of what Lee was talking about, preaching to the choir. Who's watching them? We know from other polling that Republicans aren't watching very much. We know that Fox News isn't even covering them barely, if at all. And that's where a large number of Republicans get at least some significant portion of their news. So I think this trend is important to look at. The other piece is a question we asked that we had not asked before, and I actually haven't seen anybody else ask this, which is, do you think that Donald Trump should be charged with crimes in relation to this? And then, do you think he will? And I love that. I think it's a great way to ask a question. So should he be charged? Among national adults, 50% say yes, 45% say no. That's pretty significant, especially when you look at the independent number is 49-46. That's really driving this, right? Will he be charged? Only 28% think he will be charged. So there's maybe not a disconnect there, but there certainly is what people think should happen and what they think will happen.
I would just say that one of the things about former President Trump that people are getting a little tired of, and this includes Republicans, is his obsession with relitigating what happened in 2020. Elections are about forward thinking. And I think the Republicans, if they have a major concern, aside from some of the candidates they have running for Senate with what's going on with Donald Trump, it's that he's pulling it back to 2020 constantly. And they really want to move ahead. And to Mary's point about what we saw on TV, I mean, it really gets back to that old line, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And in this case, your own eyes told the story. I think this data is going to undergo a change. And I guess we can end with this point, because why not end with what I'm going to say? But it's going to end, I think, with the data will undergo some kind of change if places like Georgia and New York file formal charges, if the Department of Justice, before or after or during the midterm elections, starts issuing indictments at some of the big names we've seen. And I guess the last point is every person who's testified before the committee so far is a Republican.
Yeah, but Lee, I'm not going to let you have the last word.
Darn.
Okay, because I think we're really dealing with a bigger issue here. Is that we're all in our silos, particularly when it comes to news, and this is going to be characterized as a political witch hunt, as it already has been. We're heading into the midterm elections. The first question really was, what's this going to mean for the midterm elections? And I think that's kind of top of mind for the Attorney General as well. How do you navigate this, where you do have, as you point out, Trump Republicans, who many of whom were with him through the entire administration, now testifying, and not make it look like it's a political witch hunt? And certainly will be compounded if former President Trump decides to throw in his hat again to run for president.
I will say, Lee, I'm very impressed that we're 9 or 10 minutes into this podcast and you didn't mention Watergate. So I'm really, really impressed about that. But Barb brought
because this doesn't look like Watergate hearings at all.
All right, moving on.
Watergate was kids' play.
Barb mentioned this being an election year, and the hearings really haven't broken through as a top issue for voters in November. 37% cite inflation. as the number one issue on their minds looking ahead to the 2022 congressional midterm elections. And the hearings, only 9% cite the January 6th hearings. And that 37% is really in line with other polls that we're seeing. Just a sidebar, the inflation rate hit a 40-year high in June. And we look at other polls that have asked about inflation. According to an AP NORC poll, 40% of Americans say inflation is one of their top 5 priorities of the year. That number was at 14% in December and less than 1% last year. There's been a nearly 10% increase in the proportion of respondents who reference the economy overall.
10 point, right?
10
Yeah,
point, yes,
10
10 percentage point increase. So that's at 77% now compared with 68% in December. And just to come back to the political realm, 69% of Americans disapprove of how President Joe Biden is handling the economy. And just out this morning, we're recording on Thursday morning, the jobless picture is not good. It's up, raising questions about the strength of the labor market. So that was really the one economic point that Joe Biden had to hang his hat on, was the unemployment and the unemployment numbers. And so in an election year, this really doesn't paint a very good picture for the president and perhaps Democrats moving forward. Lee, what do you make of all this?
Well, I mean, clearly, if we do go back to it's the economy stupid from 1992, inflation is going to be front and center if that's where it is. And we're talking 4 months from now. So, unlikely that the economy is going to suddenly take a flip. So I think that's obviously a major concern for the White House and the Democrats in Congress. What I find is that when gas prices were going up, it was a daily headline. Gas prices have been going down, maybe not as quickly or to the extent that they went up, but that's not part of what our daily chatter is right now. So it sort of stays, kind of like where it was.
But despite the lack of chatter around gas prices, according to a June-July poll from Pew, 75% of Americans say they're very concerned over the rising price of food and consumer goods, and the same proportion worry about the rising price of gas and energy. So these are, like you said, Lee, you don't have to be James Carville to realize that it's the economy stupid, but these are really the issues that are hitting home for Americans.
Well, I think also it was very interesting in this poll that we saw that there are a number of issues just below the radar here, below inflation. And inflation is really driven by Republicans. In other words, Republicans see that as a number one issue overwhelmingly. So do a plurality of independents. But I think what's interesting too is that right underneath that you have 18% of Americans, their top issue is abortion. And we haven't seen that either in a very long time. Below that is guns and healthcare. And then also just at 9% are the January 6th hearings. So if you actually add up all of those issues as well, we again see a very contentious electorate here. One concerned about the issues that I think the Democrats are going to try to make a good deal of hay over for the midterm elections. But then, as you point out, Mary, the economy is something that is overwhelming and certainly top of mind for many Americans.
The White House has been tweeting out almost every day the gas prices as they fall, almost in real time. They're down 1 cent, they're down 2 cents. And obviously that's what they want to do. Gas prices, I think, are the kind of tip of the spear in terms of inflation. But the Fed doesn't look at gas prices or food prices when they make determinations about what to do about inflation. I think that's kind of the undercurrent of this story is what Americans are thinking about inflation, maybe about gas prices or food prices, but the Fed is looking at what's called core inflation. Core inflation is down slightly from the last couple of months, but it's still running at a rate that hasn't been seen since last seen in October of 1982. So it's been a very long time. I dare say that only a few of us on this podcast have actually lived through that as adults, that kind of inflation. And the Fed will make that determination about whether to continue to raise rates based on this core inflation. And right now, it does seem indicative that the Fed will follow the European Central Bank, which just raised rates today on this Thursday as we record this, in a way that is likely to further the pain that people are feeling. Maybe not at the pump, but in not being able to buy houses because of mortgage rates and all sorts of other things. So I think it's interesting to see what people say about how they feel about inflation, but the facts underneath it are certainly not the kind of facts that this White House or Democrats would be
Yeah.
terribly enthused about. The wild card here is what you pointed out, Bart. The second issue on the list of top issues is abortion. My guess is, I may not be right, but my guess is that's not Republicans, that's Democrats who are concerned
Absolutely.
about abortion rights, which we have never seen in this
Yes.
kind of way because there's never been a threat like this. Does that trump inflation? George Bush will tell you nothing trumps the economy, right? And wishes he could get that back. And more to the point, nothing trumps the perception of the economy.
Yes, of course.
Bush's economy was improving and he lost to Clinton because it was the economy stupid. And that was because of the perception of the economy. So I think this perception, what we're doing, which is asking people about their perception of the economy, is actually at least as valuable, if not more valuable, than the underlying numbers, the underlying facts. It's the perception that is going to drive the politics of this.
If the Biden administration is successful in extinguishing some of the inflation talk, do we then end up with recession talk, which probably doesn't do you a whole lot better for the midterm?
Yeah, I mean, that's still being threaded. The jobs numbers aren't particularly terrible today. We still have, this is among the lowest unemployment rates we've ever had in history. And the jobs numbers are really right at the margin. Plus, nobody's paying attention to jobs. They're paying attention to inflation. Now, Biden wishes they were paying attention to jobs because it's been such a good run, a historically good run. But nobody pays attention to the good thing when there's the bad thing that you feel every single time you run your credit card at the Stop and Shop or at the mobile Exxon,
Yeah.
So historically, people have, talked about the midterm elections as being a referendum on the president, and the president certainly is not doing well this time around. In fact, in this poll,
That's an understatement.
he, yes, he's at his lowest point. And I think what was very interesting about the drop from 40% to the 36% that he has currently is that drop was primarily among Democrats and young Democrats. So what is just your thought on how this is are we going to see this historical trend, or is there the potential that people, like they did in 2020, they voted one way for Congress and the Senate and another way for president?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a separation. And I think the Supreme Court actions is really what's going to be driving Democrats to the polls. And whether Joe Biden is at 38 or 48, not that he can get that high this soon, or 36 or 46, whatever, I think for Democrats, that's not going to be where the action is. And so I think that the midterm are very much an open proposition right now.
Is Lee right?
I would think so. I mean, there's wild cards. The abortion thing is a wild card. And are there other wild cards? The world is an unpredictable and crazy place. So lots of wild cards. I mean, Joe Biden has COVID, right? Hopefully he's going to feel better and it's mild and he'll get through it, but it's a wild card. We don't know.
The other wild card is when Lee sees somebody for the second or third time.
Uh-oh.
Is he more likely to remember the person's name or face? Lee?
Well, we have a tragic fact this time. Oh, fun fact. I'm sorry. We call it the fun fact. And the question that Jay alluded to in the opening and Mary had just made a nasty reference to, no, just kidding, is that Princeton Survey Research Associates asked in 1991, 3 decades later, we asked the question, after you've met a person for the first time, are you more likely to remember that person's face, or are you more likely to remember that person's name? And the numbers 3 decades later are still overwhelmingly that you would tend to remember the face, but the name goes. I guess unless you're running for Congress, whereupon you have to remember everybody's name in your district. But I'm in the neither category, because I can meet someone and forget who it was 2 hours later, or having met with them, I should say, for 2 hours, and then 10 minutes later, forget that they were sitting right next to me. And names, I'm very challenged in any way. I think there's just too many names out there. How's that for fingerprint?
So here's what surprised me about this, because I love trend. So when it was asked in 1991, 87% said face, 8% said name. We asked last month, 83% said face, a little bit down, but different methodology, whatever, and 10% said name. Think about how much has changed since 1991. We are so much more visual than we were. We are on our phones and on screens 24/7 practically. I mean, I don't sleep with the screen in front of my face, but you know what I mean. And we are so acculturated to the visual. I'm surprised this number didn't go up.
Yeah, interesting.
No, it's particularly interesting. We didn't ask what if the person is also standing next to their pet. Are you more likely to remember their name or the pet's?
Wow.
Pet,
Because
pet's name.
I will definitely remember the pet. I'll remember what the pet looks like, and I will remember the pet's name. But perhaps what shoes the person was wearing, I'll be able to match them up, but don't pay quite as much attention to, I guess, my own species.
We have our priorities, Barb. Yeah. I share yours.
So Barbara's going to turn to the person and say, "You look familiar, but I can't quite place you. Hi, Fido. How you doing?"
Well, that's, I have actually done that. I have actually done that on walks. I will say, "Oh, how great. There's Baker's family. How are you doing?"
Mary, where are you in all this?
Oh, gosh. Well, I agree with Barb. If I see a pet, I'm remembering the pet's name before I remember anything else. But I'm a face person. And I will say that COVID has been a bit of a challenge, especially with our students, because it's been really hard to kind of remember or associate a face with a name. And in the middle of the semester, having students take their masks off, which was great. I felt a little bit behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
Especially when they don't have their name right at the bottom, like they do in Zoom, right? It's like, I think we probably should have instituted some kind of crazy name tag thing where, okay, we're coming in person. You're going to need to wear a name tag that looks like the bottom of a screen in Zoom, and then we'll all be good.
Just like the congressional hearings.
That's it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Greta Stuckey, Mike Bowler, and Will Promisel.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving us a review. Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it will cooperate. Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.